The pomp, the pageantry, and the promises. A budget address is one of the most watched moments in provincial politics. Every dollar tells a story, and the path from bid to balance sheet is anything but simple.
Mr. Speaker, opportunity can arise from challenges. Tough choices we're making today will lead to new opportunities tomorrow.
The budget is meant to set the government's agenda, laying out priorities for the fiscal year ahead. Drafts are written, ripped up, and rewritten. Communications teams test the messaging while finance officials refine the math. By the time the finance minister stands up to deliver the budget, it's been months of having conversations and crunching the numbers. Welcome to Off Script with New West. I'm Shannon Greer, and joining me today to talk about the bottom line of a budget is Michael Solberg, partner at New West Public Affairs and a former stakeholder relations advisor to the Federal Minister of Health in Ottawa. We also have Jamie Mozeson, senior consultant at New West Public Affairs and the former executive director of the UCP Government Caucus. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thanks, Shannon.
Great to be here.
Well, we both know that the budget is a big document, and the general public doesn't usually comb through it in too much detail, but I know that you both do. And you have also contributed to the content of both federal and provincial budgets. So I want to start with how the budget process actually works. Mike, we'll start with you. How do ideas go from departments, from the public, from MLAs into the budget?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And certainly we have some expertise in this. The budget process essentially starts as soon as the last budget is tabled and passed. So what that means is it starts anywhere between 9 and 12 months before the next budget day in the following year. How the ideas kind of ultimately make it into the budget is ministers, MLAs, and stakeholders pitch their priorities, new programs, infrastructure, tax changes. Those proposals are ultimately filtered through mandate letters that are often issued by the Premier and the Premier's office, where they have already decided on some matters that really they've aimed to address politically. But if you're a stakeholder and you're working outside of government, this is when you need your champions inside government. So if you wait until Treasury Board has ultimately made its calls, you're already too late. So I would say in understanding the process, ideally, you want to start talking to government, ensuring that the ideas that they're sharing with Cabinet, with Treasury Board, and with the Premier are your ideas and your priorities, and that you've communicated exactly what you're hoping to see in terms of government investment. There are a lot of good ways to go about convincing government to do that. I'm sure we'll get into that in a moment, but behind inside the sausage making is really where Treasury Board does its horse trading. Ministries come in with essentially three scenarios. They're either going to maintain the status quo, they're going to stretch themselves to reach new goals, they're going to seek new budget, new investment, new allocation, or like we're seeing federally right now, they've been instructed to find places to cut and for cutbacks. So the fight is really over what's affordable versus what's politically necessary. And those decisions are ultimately made at the highest levels of government. So budgets at the end of the day are less about bean counting and they're more about priority setting. And where the dollars go ultimately tells you exactly where the government wants to fight and win politically. So if you're a stakeholder sitting on the outside and you want to see your project or your priority advance through the provincial budget, you need to make damn sure that government is aware of your project and that you have a call to action to them, which is calling their caucus colleagues and on Treasury Board and in the Premier's office to ensure that your priority is their priority.
Let's talk about those caucus colleagues, because we know that MLAs bring ideas. They're focused on their communities, and then it all has to balance out. Jamie, tell us a little bit about how you've seen that process play out.
Absolutely. So NLAs usually will have projects that they're interested in that impact their ridings, impact their constituents, and things that they've been hearing from their stakeholders locally, as well as their voter coalition. And then they will go in turn lobby the minister in charge. And if they have a strategic view to this, they're going to be lobbying more than one minister and targeting a variety of people, especially the ministers who sit on Treasury Board itself. One thing I wanted to add to the process that Mike had talked about was that once a minister has a project or is championing something through cabinet and through the Treasury Board process, they should actually be aware walking into those meetings what their cabinet colleagues are going to say already. The battle is kind of won before the war starts. So those conversations prior to the budget, prior to those tables and those meetings are vital for these caucus members and MLAs and ministers to get these projects forward and supported by Premier and the cabinet.
That's a really interesting point, and it kind of goes to both of you that there's some art and some science. And then I'll bring in my own experience, communications. So there's always a bit of a push-pull between what you can communicate, what would be a great announcement, and what actually makes the budget. Maybe Mike, what's been your experience with this as you sort of see people try to balance out those great comms announcements, how they're going to communicate the budget and make it interesting to that general public that doesn't want to leaf through the big document?
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant question. And I think when you're curating your ask of government, a really good way to look at it is envisioning and helping the government, frankly, envision an eventual announcement on this. Like, what will the eventual communications be should you be successful? And then you convince MLAs and ministers to kind of wrap their understanding around, that eventual ribbon cutting or that eventual podium announcement, because budgets are complex. We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars of complex processes in terms of how these things are decided upon and ultimately allocated. A lot of this goes on behind the scenes, and regular people will not have any understanding or awareness of where these dollars are being spent, how they're being spent, and the impact of those dollars. So if you're the government, obviously it's your charge and your interest to show your work to Albertans and to your constituents that these dollars are making real impact in their communities. That's their goal. So if you're a stakeholder and you want to make your ask of government appear like low-hanging fruit, something that will be digestible to regular people, to Albertans, you want to convince government of the communications aspect around that, and make your request of government investment digestible to regular people, because that's ultimately the audience that governments are courting. Of course, government, cabinet, the premier have a fiduciary responsibility to operate an efficient government, but you cannot remove politics from the equation. Ultimately, budgets and virtually any decision making that goes on at the political level is about getting themselves reelected, getting MLAs reelected in target communities. And if you can convince government that your request of their investment and of taxpayer dollars is going to be communicated in a way that courts voters, and you can wrap their heads around what that looks like in terms of a vision, in terms of communications, you're going to have a lot more compelling argument, I think, and a lot easier path to success. So I think the best way to go about this is just helping them understand that your project is consumable by regular people. It's consumer friendly. It's something that the regular people will understand, and kind of doing the hard work for them and helping them picture it before they even deliberate on it.
The government around the budget cycle and the rollout of the actual budget itself, they're always looking for good news announcements to really prop up their budget and roll it out in a way that Albertans or Canadians will digest in a positive manner. So if stakeholders are able to provide those sort of good news announcements that make Albertans really and Canadians pay attention to what they're doing and how it impacts them in a positive manner, that is a really good ask to be bringing to the government.
Not to put you on the spot, Jamie, but do you have an example of an announcement of a budget piece that you think was just executed flawlessly?
I think that honestly, the budget leading up to the 2023 campaign by the UCP was very well done.
Budget 23 secures Alberta's future by growing and diversifying the economy, strengthening healthcare and education, improving the safety of communities across the province, and establishing a new fiscal framework.
It was as in an entirety, it was done as a pre-election sort of platform budget, which you will see many governments employ budget rollout as an election platform to test ideas and to maybe pivot if something is coming forward out of the budget that they really like in terms of spending on roads, spending on hospitals, spending on school infrastructure or education. Then they will pivot towards towards that and use that as a plank towards the towards the election campaign. So I think that the UCP government in 2023 really utilized the budget in a positive manner towards getting Alberta's attentions and getting voter intentions as well.
Mike, do you have any sort of thoughts on this too? Because we know that budgets can really create a solid base for a campaign, but that's not always the case. Are there any examples where you've seen it go awry?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, every number in the budget tells a story on its own, but it's the effort and kind of the choreography of the proprietor of that budget that tells the full story, and where you actually start to have some control in the narrative. And where I've seen it go wrong, I think a really good example. Granted, they didn't hold the purse strings on this, but it was their own budget announcement or their own budget commitment was the Alberta NDP in 2023, where they committed again to raising the corporate tax rate in Alberta. That was a longstanding commitment of theirs. The former Premier Rachel Notley had reiterated this as a commitment a number of different times, but by the time that they had fully costed it, put it in their platform, and did their announcement with, I believe it was Todd Hirsch, it was just poorly explained. And really, at the end of the day, I think it just led to a narrative that was no longer in their control, that the Alberta NDP were all about, raising taxes on business.
We are taking the lowest corporate tax rate in the country, and we are moving it to be the lowest corporate tax rate in the country, lower than Scott Moe's, lower than Doug Ford's. So business people who suggest that they would leave because of this, well, frankly, I don't exactly know where they would go.
If they had explained better that they were going to use this to lower income taxes, or that they were going to be able to bolster better government services, which I know was their intent, I think they may not have suffered for it. So, budget announcements are as much about tabling, government priority. And again, it's their fiduciary responsibility to do so. But it's also a political dance where they set clear priorities that regular people are supposed to be able to digest and understand. So the communications around every announcement and every dollar spent is crucial to any re-election effort, and to ultimately the support or lack thereof that a government or prospective government has.
And certainly, I think that many people would see that as a major pivot point. So then maybe how can budgets or, those platform commitments really define the political agenda and the political battlefield going forward? Jamie, we'll start with you.
Honestly, it lays the groundwork for the next year in terms of what those priorities are. And if there are new priorities that come into play or new asks of the government or the minister that fall outside of the budget, you can assume that those will not be looked at. This is really the political agenda setting and how the government will be communicating for the next, frankly, year with their stakeholders and with their voter coalition.
I want to pull back the curtain on the actual budget day. There's a lot of pomp around this. The first time I really experienced a provincial budget, I was a reporter. Everyone's in lockdown. You're not allowed to communicate outside of these rooms. There's just a lot of things that go around it. Mike, can you just kind of give us a peek inside what a budget day looks like and why it's set up that way and has been for years?
Yeah, well, look, people need to remember that the budget is in and of itself legislation that needs to be passed with the confidence of legislators who are ultimately elected by their representatives. So there's a lot of pomp and circumstance around it, because there's actual proceedings that go around the tabling of the budget, the first reading of it as a bill in the legislature, and then ultimately its consideration by, all MLAs in the House. And of course, if you're in a majority scenario, which you're almost always in Alberta, you can have full confidence that it will pass, but that doesn't remove the fact that it does need to go through proper procedure. What you don't see, and what is kind of exists outside of the legislative pageantry, is the lockup, which we have been invited to. We ensure our clients get invited to if they're interested, and this is where the government of Alberta is given the opportunity to invite a specific set of stakeholders to see embargoed materials from the budget. that communicate, either from the press release that eventually is released or the budget documents themselves, and people get an inside peek and actually combing through the estimates, going line by line. So when the budget is tabled and goes live, there's a number of stakeholders who are already fully read in, are ready to report back to their boards, their CEOs, whomever, but also importantly, to the media that are hanging around the rotunda, looking for comment on the budget from external stakeholders, namely business and industry. And usually it's curated in such a way that the people leaving the rotunda and speaking to media have a positive view of the budget. You don't often see the government of Alberta inviting stakeholders who are not going to like what they see in the budget, because of course then they'll go and talk to the media and share those views. So again, just speaks to the political kind of calculus of how the budget day goes, how the budget is ultimately framed in terms of its content to legislators, but also to the media, to industry, to stakeholders, mayors, municipalities, chambers of commerce. I mean, everybody has a vested interest in the budget, and they're asked to digest it in unique and different ways, all with the aim of the government hopefully smoothing over the rough edges of a budget when there is times of austerity, and also profiling the big pieces that they want talked about, which are oftentimes, big, savvy investments that they want to be as part of the headline.
One group that we know is hanging around the rotunda who wasn't exactly invited is the opposition. Ian Brody let me know that their job is to oppose. And so they are coming in with that sort of frame and narrative that pretty much whatever's in the budget, they're not going to like it. Jamie, what's sort of the work that goes in on the government side to prep for the opposition to oppose?
Well, to be honest, budget day is really just about the government and the validators, as Mike had said. So they have been working very hard with stakeholders to make sure that they are in press releases, they're talking to media. And unfortunately, the opposition usually ends up in the third part of the story, if covered at all. So it really is about the government getting their message across. And then beyond the actual budget day, the government, the MLAs, the ministers will all be briefed on the impacts to their local area and their portfolios, so they can get in front of their chambers of commerce and continue to push out the message of the government in terms of good news and things that they have to provide to Albertans.
We're running out of time, so I want to end with, what one piece of advice would you give around the budget process and what people might not know or understand? Mike, we'll start with you, and then Jamie will go to you.
I would say don't concern yourself too much with the sausage making. It's complex. There's so many cooks in the kitchen. You're never going to get a peek behind the curtain, really, if you're an external stakeholder or a lobbyist like we are, because these things are have cabinet confidence. Treasury board operates behind closed doors. The agendas themselves are confidential, so you're never going to get that full look into ultimately how the budget is decided upon, and how the individual priorities are kind of curated and then ultimately approved. So therefore, just make the ask of government on the basis of a compelling political and business case, helping the government to understand the exceptional return on investment that your project promises, and make sure it's well socialized amongst caucus and ministers and members of the department. This is what I call de-risking the investment, like making sure that this is not the first time that members of the governing caucus are hearing of this. Demonstrate community enthusiasm behind your request of government from mayors, influential business leaders, regular people. Submit your budget request on that basis, and just let the politicians then duke it out with the bureaucrats on how it will be funded, because you're not going to get a chance to dictate that yourselves. You're not going to get a behind the scenes look on that. So just trust in the merits of your project, and ensure politicians understand the merits of that project, and let them decide ultimately how it will be funded, because the sausage making is often very opaque, very complex, and not really the role of external stakeholders and members of the regular community to decide.
Jamie,
Yeah.
thoughts?
And I think, the ask, Mike is bang on with all of that advice. And I would just piggyback on that and say the ask needs to be clear. and concise and easily understandable in terms of why the government should invest in this and also get it in early. These things are determined way earlier than people anticipate them to be, but making that case, that political case of why the government should be investing in your project, in your organization, is vital in terms of their language and their political alignments and keys.
Great point.
Well, I think that's very valuable advice and a great spot to leave it. So thank you both for joining me, and thanks to our listeners for tuning into the 5th and final episode of Off Script with New West. We hope this series has pulled back the curtain and offered a clearer understanding of Canadian politics. If you'd like to learn more, or we can support your organization in navigating today's ever-changing political landscape, or with your budget ask, we'd love to hear from you. You can find our contact information in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to Off Script with New West. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.